I'm going back in, I think.
Hello again.
Hi.
How was that, Amanda? Big deep breath there.
Sorry.
Right, Steve, do you want me to do the slides for you?
Enough of the slide slave. Hopefully the timing's good. I'll just wait for Amanda and
As you can see, I'm now back on my PC.
yeah, it's a nice background.
You're not going to have another go at your presentation, Ian. You can only do it once.
Ah, that's it then.
Thank you very much. Interesting thoughts from the group is the importance of finding somebody who actually understands your business and understands you. It goes to what Ian said, is just try and select to kind of look at the testimonials, try to see how well they're approved. But it isn't straightforward. It can be a bit frustrating. Sometimes you may not always get it right 100% the first time. But it's really finding that combination of a bit of flair to make you stand out, but that sense that the designer or the wordsmith really actually understands you and your business, because we are all too close to our business. We get quite territorial to a certain degree, and it's that element of trying to allow somebody else to get under your skin, and then you can start really kind of building up the website as Ian has talked about. Okay, so the next session, I'm delighted that we have Steve Grant from Figment Agency, and I could confidently say what Steve doesn't know about SEO isn't worth knowing. They are very, very good at this area. It can sound a little bit cold in terms of what is SEO, but actually it's a really kind of, it's very, very neat and clever the way that SEO processes work. So I think this is going to be very interesting, and I'm sure Steve will break this down into chunks which we can really kind of get a grip on. So Steve, enough of me, over to you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, so the good news is it's very distilled, nothing too technical today. We're going to talk about the essentials of SEO, how it works, and what to measure if you're looking at an SEO campaign or you're engaging an SEO agency, and if you're trying to do it yourself, where to get help and how to reach me. So, understanding SEO. I'm Steve, Figment Agency Managing Director, and my SEO experience dates back to Ask Jeeves and Yahoo, and it's almost pre-Google. Nowadays, Google, as of June, controls 86% of the SEO market, and I think Ian touched on some really good stats earlier, but I like to think of it as if you haven't got a website that's visible, then you might as well print off a load of leaflets and shove them in a cupboard, because it's really, really important to have a great website, but it's even more important that somebody sees that website. So let's get going. What is SEO? It stands for search engine optimization. And yes, it's about the process of driving the non-paid, free or natural traffic to search engines. So how does that work? We perform a search on predominantly Google, a little bit on Bing, and that traffic ends up on a web page. And it's that natural process of being on page one of Google that creates the most trusted traffic that you can get, because we're conditioned by nature to ignore advertisements all day long. I think we do it subconsciously hundreds of times a day, and we don't like to be sold to. So an SEO result, if we were to look at it at a basic level, often appears below ads, and those ads look something like this, and they've been blended as much as Google can get away with into looking like the natural listings. But because we perform searches so many times a day, we have become aware of what's an ad and what isn't. And when we click on an ad, we're always a bit skeptical. So if you look at the results of thousands of visits that have come from ads versus thousands of visits that have come from organic, the organic ones will always convert a much higher rate. So that is a search engine page distilled. And in reality, a search engine page now looks a lot different to that depending on what you input, but that's another conversation. Google's mission ultimately is to organize the world's information, and it's on a little bit of a mini mission at the moment to try and solve the answer that people have got on the actual search engine. But without getting too far down a rabbit hole, I'm going to move on to the business case for SEO. All of the traffic combined from other sources is still less than the natural organic traffic that comes from predominantly Google, which suggests that it's really a fundamental part of a business strategy. Of those, 60% of all of the clicks go to top 3 placements, which is why they're so coveted. And most people don't click on page 2, and if they do, it's because they've not found what they're looking for. So the conversions are usually higher, the higher up. So we mentioned before, around 80% ignore ads. And I find that in certain sectors, that can be much higher than 80%. And the conversion, there was a study that was done to work out the leads that came from SEO versus, for example, traditional advertising. And the SEO conversion rate was on average across different industries, 14.6%. And that's compared to print, which would be below 2%. So it's a lot higher converting traffic, down to the fact that people have so much trust with Google. And I'm sure that there's many of the people that know others who think Google is the internet. So if Google presents your business in the top 3 positions, you're almost pre-trusted. So trying to get through SEO in 15 minutes is pretty tough. So I'm going to break it down and make it as easy to understand as possible. So if we were to distill SEO, there's 2 broad areas that Google is interested in. They are relevancy. Are you the relevant answer to the query that somebody has? And authority. Are you the trustworthy and authoritative resource? It's a bit like word of mouth on the internet. And the authority piece is the one that people really struggle with, because a lot of people are good at writing about the topic that they know about, or about being relevant to the keywords that they're looking to attract users from. But with the authority side of things, it's a bit like business networking or PR online, and it's very much out of control. So as an agency, that's the biggest area that we help clients with. But we're now going to have a little look into these 2 areas in a bit more depth. But that's in a nutshell. And if we were to say that there are approximately 200 factors that Google uses in its algorithm to rank a website, around about half of that is around authority. So a lot of people, when they come to me, they say, oh, I've put these keywords into my webpage and I'm not coming up on the page 1 of Google. And then 9 times out of 10, it's because their website is not perceived as the most trustworthy, authoritative website. So going into those types of SEO in a bit more detail. So on page, it's all about creating relevancy. And that is the activities on the website that basically help Google understand and rank the content. Off page, it's all happening on another platform, which you have some influence on, but it is very difficult to control. And then technical matters, which are all about making sure your website is as accessible as possible to the search engine. So it's like driving from London to Manchester. If there are blocks on the motorway and you're held up, you won't get there. And it's very much like that with Google. So if you do all of your on-page and off-page tactics and you have ticks in every box, and yet you fail on something technical, you could have a problem with the website being shown on Google or Google ranking you at the top. Hope this all makes sense so far. So on-page tactics, these are things that most people will have heard of, and it does cross over with Ian's presentation in the sense that you need very good content. Google is content hungry, and the phrase content is king is never more prevalent than today, where if you want to rank your website at the top of Google, you need a strong content strategy. And that isn't just about writing 2 or 3 pages on your subject matter, but it's about thinking about the user journey, thinking about what people are looking for, and doing research into what the customer intent is. Is it, have they got a question? Is it a pre-sales question? Do they want a buyer's guide? So I can't stress the importance of having a regularly updated blog more than here, because what blogs do is they basically keep your shop window moving. So if Bentals never updates its display, no one will probably go in. And it's the same with Google. You've got to keep your shop window moving. You've got to show Google that you're effectively fresh. And it's a good sign of trust with users as well, because if they land on a website and they see that you've got a regularly updated blog, they know you're in business. But in terms of how it actually helps search engines, a lot of the time we use blogs for our clients to attract journalists to link back to us. So it actually helps build the off-page strategy. So for example, we would look for what a journalist is looking for, how to digitize your business in COVID-19, and then we would create an article based around that request, so that the journalist will want to link to it naturally. So that's one example, and obviously the freshness is very, very, very important. So that's why blogging is crucial. And a lot of people say, well, how many words should the blog be? Well, it's really about how many words it takes to thoroughly answer the topic matter and the user intent. The other things are technical, they sort of overlap with the technical build of the website, but a lot of people fail to put these things into their website. So they miss out on fundamentals like the title tag and the meta tag, which should have your keywords in them. And the title tag needs to basically be quite short. And if you're going to do it, you want to have keywords that relate to the page, and you want them to be unique on every single page. So that's title tag and meta tag optimization, and it's really the bread and butter of SEO. So all of the other stuff, it's a bit pointless if you don't get some of these fundamentals right. Heading tag optimization, that's about making sure that your page has a hierarchy of headings and importance. So you have a main heading, what we call a heading 1, and then you have subheadings, heading 2, heading 3, and most content management systems have this format to basically create subheadings, and that's how Google understands what's a heading, what's a subheading, and how to weight the importance. And what you put in a heading 1 and a heading 2 is always more, it carries more weight than a heading 3 or heading 4. Internally linking is one of the underrated tactics for SEO. People don't push the linking between one page and another page, but it's actually very, very important in carrying the weight and getting Google to crawl through your website and understand the relationships between pages. And it basically builds strength in your own optimization. So I would recommend that if you've got pages that you can link to each other, make sure that that's part of your strategy. And image optimization. So whether you use stock imagery or professional, a lot of people fail to optimize their images, particularly for mobile. And because Google only ranks the mobile page speed now, it doesn't look at the desktop factors. It's very, very important that you condense and optimize your images. So there's, depending on the platform, there's different tools that can do that. Most of them can do it automatically, but it's an essential that you do it and that you make your images appear sharp, because a lot of people have Retina devices, but also compressed for the device. So in an ideal world, you want a nice sharp image on a desktop that presents your business well, but you want to have that optimized for mobile and for 4G, and 5G is coming through, but for people connecting on the go. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the on-page factors. I'm briefly going to touch on the off-page SEO. So the main topic here is around building links, and you don't want to force the issue. If you do, you can basically go into a gray area known as black hat SEO. And a lot of people step into the gray area, which is where you're trying to influence the links, and you think you can get away with it, and eventually it catches you up. So At Figment, we only do what we call white hat SEO. So we'll only do it if it's the very time consuming manual effort to basically influence the links. So what can you do? Well, we've already talked about blogs. So content marketing is quite a very important part of it. If you create content that people want to link to, if you create a tool that allows you to calculate something, a resource, a how-to guide, or something that is worthy and positions you as an expert, something that they can't get elsewhere, then you'll naturally attract people who will want to link to that resource. So content strategy actually heavily influences off-page strategy as well. In SEO terms, social media only counts about 3%, but because people don't go through a direct buying cycle these days, people do the checks on reviews on social media, and brand awareness is actually very important in actually the whole grand scheme of marketing. Social media is important, and it's very crucial to control what's being said about your brand, because even if someone finds you on Google, they'll then check up your brand and look at your social media page. And it does influence SEO in a very, very small scale, but it's something that you need to make sure that you are controlling. And other things like podcasts and external reviews, these factors are looked upon by Google as quality indicators. If you have excellent reviews, that will really help your SEO efforts, particularly on a local level. And if you're engaging in other things, YouTube channels, podcasting, or other types of marketing away from your website, then you've got every chance that you get more gravitas. So for example, YouTube is owned by Google, and creating a YouTube channel with a series of videos that are properly tagged and linking back to your website won't do your strategy any harm at all. And then technical SEO, which I'm not going to go into too much depth, is basically all about making sure that Google can find your website and that users find it accessible. And this goes from making sure that your website loads quickly. I think that there's a drop of 7% in conversions for every 0.1 second that your website loads. And it's very, very important your website loads quicker than ever, because people are so impatient nowadays. We're all rushed off our feet. There's something called structured data, which I don't have time to go into today, but it's about formatting your website in the right way where it does help to answer the question on the search engine page. So when did Chelsea last win the league? Who's Beyonce married to? What time is this florist open? That's all governed by basic data that's put into the website code. So it's really, that's where you need to engage a professional to help with this area. But you'll see platforms from this point onwards get better at it. And things like XML sitemap, very important to actually guide Google around your website. There's something called an XML sitemap, and it's basically a file, and it helps Google journey around your website and understand which pages are important and have been updated. And if you're running multi-language, you can indicate what your preference language is, and there's a whole load of other technical aspects. So technical is housekeeping. On page is essential and mostly done up front with a little bit of ongoing, and off page needs to be really a regular thing that you monitor. So SEO in 2020 and really prior to now has been very much like this. You've got your website being very, very important in the SEO strategy, and your SEO campaign being run more often than not afterwards. In 2021 and going forward, the way that Google's looking at this is it's one piece of the puzzle. It's not really looking at it as two separate things. So there's an algorithm update that Google's basically been dropping hints for a long while, and will be rolling out next year, called Core Web Vitals. And it's basically looking at the health of your website. So the big upshot here is you need to consider the SEO when you're building and constructing a website from day one. It's not something that you should add on afterwards. It's something that you should plan around and plan your website content around. So ideally, when we're building a website, we go through a planning session that involves content creation, but also we would have a checklist of things that are very, very important Google's looking at. So Core Web Vitals, it's a very much a told you so first here. Interactivity is important. So is your website engaging? Are people going through the website? Is the journey enjoyable? Google's using the Google Analytics, the analytics tools it has to inform some of these algorithm updates. Visual stability. Do you go on the home page and then it suddenly jumps around when you go on different pages? How easy is it to use your website? Is it accessible to those who have a disabled a screen reader or something else that they're using to access your website? And of course, the load speed itself. So these are just some of the little factors that Google is now making a heavy part of its algorithm. So if you want to play to Google's best interests, you need a really good SEO strategy as part of your website build. Now, obviously, it's a big topic. It changes around 500 times a year with 2 or 3 big updates. So it's hard to stay on top of it. The good news is that we're doing that for you. So you've got one resource, and that's here, the Figment agency blog. And if you want to be added to the newsletter, please let me know. This is where we are writing and distilling the information that is coming out of the search engine world and the digital marketing sphere, and presenting it in business language that's easy to understand and actionable. And there's a couple of good resources that I'd like to put you in touch with. The blog on our website, which has been written by our team and myself, where there's some really good tips and advice. And a specific link to the 9 ways to SEO your web page. So this is a very actionable infographic where you can you can find some practical tips on how to actually go in and change some of your web page to be more optimized for the search engine. So as business owners, we obviously need to make sure we're tracking results, and a lot of people don't know and they don't understand what they should be looking at when it comes to SEO. And so I thought it would be worth just quickly touching on how we should measure results. What should look at? We should look at the organic traffic by period. So we know that 51% of all traffic is organic, so you should be aiming for at least 50% of your traffic coming from organic. And if it's much lower than that, the chances are you're probably missing out on some customers. We would track traffic usually looking at 90 days, 60 days, 30 days. Because organic is more of a long-term part of your marketing strategy, it's best to look at it year on year and look at it in sort of quarterly chunks. But you can use Google Analytics as a free tool that allows you to track your website traffic. If you haven't installed Google Analytics, then I would recommend it being the #1 thing that you do after this presentation. Ideally, you want to be tracking the positions of the keywords that you're aiming to get. So with the keywords, we want to start with keyword research. We want to be looking for keywords that people are entering. We want to be tracking those, otherwise it's poor marketing. So we want to be basically seeing an increase, maybe not every month, but most months over a period of 6, 12, 24 months, and then gradually climbing up to those top 3 coveted spots in Google. We're going to be looking at the actual number of visits and the authority of the website, which should increase over time. If you do all of the correct things and put the ticks in the right box, then you'll see an increase in authority, which is measured by something called domain authority. It's a score out of 100. And the main thing is you just need a more authoritative website than your competitor. And last but not least, probably the most important of everything is actually measuring what action are people taking on the website. This goes back to Ian's presentation about calls to action. Are they inquiring, engaging a live chat? Are they phoning? Are they clicking to call from a mobile? And you want to be able to measure that. Talk to your webmaster or your technical team about measuring that in Google Analytics, because if you can get that information, you can then track back that to the source of inquiry. So you can work out where those inquiries are coming from, whether they're coming from organic. And if you use a tool called Google Search Console, you can even find the queries that people are typing in that result in a conversion to inquiry. Given the time, I think that's about all I can cover today. I do have some more slides on winning backlinks, but I would say that because it's quite a big subject, more than open to having questions. And if anyone needs any sort of more tailored advice, please drop me an email and connect with my LinkedIn, where I'm posting a few times a week on what's happening in the SEO industry.
Steve, thank you. Do you just finish off your slide?
Yep.
Take it off. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Steve. I think there's, between yourself and Ian, there's been some fantastic information there. And I think you both distilled a lot of difficult content into a good bite size. Does anybody have any questions for Ian or Stephen at this particular point, which they've raised? Is there anything which you would like to ask them? Are we all going to be quite shy? I think it's all fairly shy. Oh, no. Okay.
Hi, I
Hi.
wanted to ask, thanks both Steve and Ian, it's been really informative. Steve, you mentioned about optimizing the images, and is it a good idea to always change the title of the image when you're uploading it onto the website so that it's, you know, SEO optimized in the title?
Yeah, the file name actually will make a very, very small difference. And it's the sort of thing that if you've got the time to do, then great, do it, because it's something that you can control. The most important thing with regards to image, besides compressing it, is including something called an alt tag. An alt tag is a descriptive piece of content that it's not seen unless you roll over your mouse on an image, but it's basically understood by a search engine and by somebody who has a screen reader. And that is a very, very fundamental part of image optimization. So if you're only going to do one thing, you're better off doing the alt tag than renaming your files. But if you've got the time to rename your files, then you want to include the keywords, because that will help it come up in the Google image search.
Great, thanks. I think that does it on LinkedIn as well. When you post an image on LinkedIn, it asks you for a title.
Yeah, it's just best practice to do that.
Thank you.
Does anybody else?
Can I ask a question? When I've been looking at websites, I've had a few developers say to me, WordPress is so superior to, for example, sort of an off-the-shelf thing like a Wix website. And I just wondered if possibly, Ian, what the benefits are of, is it worth getting your head around WordPress if you want to do a WordPress website as opposed to one of the off-the-shelf ones?
WordPress,
Ownership of content, you know, they you know, whether, you know, how much control you have over the development of it and things like that.
WordPress currently, just for a statistic, controls something like 60% of the world's websites. However, I always think big doesn't mean beautiful. I think WordPress is reasonably good. I think Wix, and I know that Steve's a big Wix fan. I think he is anyway. I think Wix is pretty good as well. There are lots of advantages to different platforms, and it's just finding one that suits you. I mean, I don't use any other platform. I only use my own platform, which is a unique CMS that we developed for ourselves. And I think one of the key things is that you don't want to be paying a designer to do work on your website after he's designed your website. You want to be trained how to use that content management system. And you need to find one that you can be comfortable with, that is easy to use. And I think they're all getting better, but some of them are more clunky than others, I think. And to be honest, I personally think WordPress is a little bit clunky. But Steve might have a view on that. I think Wix is a little bit better.
Okay.
From an SEO standpoint of view, I can't speak any highly of WordPress, because within WordPress you can have basically there's two options. It's a bit of a myth here. There's a professional route where you can engage an agency to create and design, build you a professional website that you can manage on the WordPress platform, or you can go to wordpress.com and basically, in a similar way to Wix or Squarespace, you can just basically set up a website based on a theme. Now, they use the underlying technology, but the benefit of having a professional setup gives you more control over the technical SEO aspects. So from an SEO standpoint of view, if we look at all of the campaigns we're managing, although it's probably not a direct correlation, I've seen better results with WordPress than Wix. I've seen better results with WordPress than Squarespace. It's really, going back to what Ian says, it's really about what your goals are, who's going to be managing the website, and from there you need somebody that's got an impartial view to really give you the right advice.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen. Amanda, I just want to, Amanda Cullen, that is, because we have Amanda. When Steve mentioned about you needing to have control of your website, you nodded very vigorously. It's obviously something which is important for you.
Yeah. It was just something I mentioned actually in the breakout group with the previous session when I was talking to Ian and some of the others, that it is really important to me. And I've taught, when I was commissioning work, when I was commissioning my current website, it was a kind of absolute prerequisite when I talked to the designer that I wanted to be able to go in and change it. And I guess, I mean, pretty much what Steve's just been saying, you know, if you want to be able to go in and put your own blogs in, if you want to go in and tweak your, you know, your keywords, if you have to pay somebody else or ask somebody else every time, it's an absolute nightmare.
Very true. One final question which I'd like to ask the group, just as a quick straw poll. Steve had the challenge of the kind of Google Analytics. Out of curiosity, out of the last 2-3 weeks, put your hand up if you've actually gone onto your website and or looked at Google Analytics for yourselves. How many of you have actually done it in the last 3 weeks of actually thinking, I'll check my Google Analytics? Okay.
It would be bad if me and Steve didn't put our hands up, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It's an interesting point. And I think depending where you are with the creation of your website or not, is we've done it at the Chamber several times, well, more than several times, done it quite a lot, but it's actually very revealing as to where people are coming to look at your site. It's a very simplistic thing, but it's really, it's interesting because it tells you kind of the parts of the time of day that they're looking at it, how they're looking at your site, looking at the information, where they're landing, how long they stay there for. And I think it's really, it's a bit of good housekeeping to just try and keep on top of it. And I think it's easy for us to just keep forgetting about it. But Steve and Ian make a very good point about this in terms of the Google Analytics. It's an easy way for you to find out how people are coming to your site and their impression of you. So I think that's a good point made there, Steve. Thank you. Okay, thank you again. We're coming back at 1 o'clock, so we've got a slightly longer break, and we'll have Lisa Morley from Business Clan just going through a lot of the social media platforms, so just moving off into a slightly different direction. As it does relate to what Steve and Ian have said, because there's 2 ways you can kind of go around with your social media and your digital approach with things. So we look forward to seeing you back at 1 o'clock. Have some refreshment and off we go again. Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.